I've said repeatedly since my confirmation hearings on that DEC's oversight and enforcement of high-volume fracturing will be rigorous and effective. Permits will only be issued consistent with DEC's ability to oversee and ensure compliance. To help guide the agency with the implementation of the measures detailed in the SGEIS, I have established a high-volume hydraulic fracturing advisory panel. Very clever name. The panel will be charged with developing recommendations to ensure DEC and other agencies like DOH and the Public Service Commission have the proper capacity to oversee, monitor, and enforce high-volume hydraulic fracturing activities. The panel will also develop recommendations to avoid and mitigate impacts to local governments and communities, and it will evaluate the current fee structure and other revenue streams to fund government oversight and infrastructure related to high-volume hydraulic fracturing. The panel members, which were intended to represent a wide variety of interest, industry, environmental groups, and government. Stan Lundeen, the former New York State Lieutenant Governor, Kathleen McGinty, former chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality under President Clinton, Eric Goldstein and Kate Sinding from NRDC, Robert Hallman, who is the board chair of the New York League of Conservation Voters, Robert F. Kennedy, representing the Waterkeeper Alliance, Robert Moore, the executive director of Environmental Advocates, Mark Brownstein, the chief counsel of the energy program of the Environmental Defense Fund, Heather Brachetti, who's the acting president and CEO of the Business Council of New York State. She's here with us today. Bob Cattell, who is the chairman of the Advanced Energy Research and Technology Center at SUNY Stony Brook and a board member of NYSERDA. Mark Bowling, who is the executive vice president and general counsel of Southwestern Energy. Senator Tom Libous, the deputy majority leader and represents the Southern Tier, and Assembly member Donna Lupardo, who also represents Broome County, or a portion of Broome County. I want to thank each of the panel members for agreeing to participate. Obviously, they all bring a lot of wisdom and guidance and expertise to the table, and we're going to need it to complete this process. So what comes next? We're in the process of preparing this massive document for production, and we hope to post it on our website by the end of the week. We will have a limited number of copies available on CD today for reporters, and I'm sure Emily DeSantis will let you know how you can get those later on. Later this month, we expect to receive the socioeconomic research I mentioned and incorporate that into the SGEIS. So that should be at the end of July. Once that's done, we'll revise the SGEIS with the new information that we get from the consultants. We will put out a final draft, and that is at that point we will start the 60-day public comment period. So that's important. People will have the summer to review the document that we've put out today, which is in the neighborhood of 900 pages, and including appendices. So we'll have a couple of months to do that, and then a formal process at the end of that. So we should have about 4 months for the public to look at this. After the public comment period, we'll go through a similar process that we went through last time. We will review all the comments. We have to provide responses to those comments, change the document as we feel appropriate based on those comments, and issue a final SGEIS. We expect and hope that that will be sometime around the end of the year. It is at that point, and only at that point, that DEC could begin to review permit applications. Then, following the issuance of the final SGEIS, we will start a rulemaking process. We are committing to incorporate all of the substance of the SGEIS in rules, and that will happen over the course of presumably 2012. So let me just say it one more time. No permits will be issued before the final SGEIS and finding statements are completed. And obviously there's several steps in the process before we get there, and it'll be a fairly 6 months or so before we get to that point. Obviously the last 6 months have been very busy ones for DEC. I've only been there for about 4 of them. DEC staff has worked tirelessly on this, along with the Department of Health, the Public Service Commission, and lots of input from other agencies like DOT. And I want to publicly thank the DEC staff, particularly Brad Field, who is the head of our minerals division, who just, put their noses to the grindstone and got the job done. I've just gone over, obviously, a lot of information, and this, I believe, provides the framework for New York moving forward with this new process in New York, and we look forward to the next several months, because I'm sure even at the end of that process, the document will be improved once again, because we do take public comments very seriously. I'm going to invite Gene Leff, who's a deputy commissioner with me at the agency and in charge of environmental remediation, including the oil and gas program, to join me. Jim Tierney, head of the water division at DEC, and Steve Russo, who is our general counsel and deputy commissioner, and we are available for comments and questions.
What's the earliest date we could see permits issued?
It's impossible to predict. That it depends in part on how many comments we get. Last time around, we had 13,000 comments, as I said. They have to all be reviewed. They have to be categorized into substantive areas and then reviewed by the staff. They have to respond to them. We have to examine them, and again, how do we address them? If real issues are raised, we have to figure out if there's additional mitigation required. So all of that input gets used to generate the next phase of the document, going toward a final document. So it's just impossible to nail down a date. Last time it took months and months for that to happen. It depends on the volume of comments.
So it wouldn't be this year, right? It would be...
I'd say it is highly unlikely that it would be this year.
Is the DEC going to move to issue permits before that rulemaking process is codified into law?
Yes, we would.
And what's the thinking behind that? Because
the SGEIS will be the template for how we permit drilling for high volume hydraulic fracturing. All of the requirements in it will be incorporated into the permits that are issued to the applicants. We think they're completely enforceable, so there'll be no difference between what DEC does before and after a rulemaking. The rulemaking, in my mind, is belt and suspenders. It may be, in the past, I don't think DEC thought they needed to do rules, but a lot of the comments we received from people the last time around insisted that rules were better, more enforceable. They felt more secure with them, and we're going to go forward with rules.
To be an expert on this, but my understanding is that the oil and gas companies keep their chemical formula they use secret. As far as I know, they were still doing that. Are you going to require them to reveal what these chemicals are so you could monitor and test them, and do you think they'll agree to that?
We will require them to give us all of the chemicals that are in the fracking fluids. We'll require them to make them public, but they can basically apply to us for confidentiality of some based on trade secrets, and we'll have to review those applications at the time. And I'll have Steve Russo talk a little bit further about that.
The way it's going to work is that it's important
Yeah.
It's important that the agency will have all the chemical information, and we believe industry will be agreeable to that, so that we can regulate it and understand what's in these. But then we're going a step further by also going to be requiring them to be publicly available, so that the public can see what's in these fracturing fluids. But in the process of making them publicly available, there are legal restrictions, and we have to give them the ability to say that something's confidential if it's legitimately confidential, and potentially not disclose the exact chemical names, but they would still have to give us make public some information to give the public an idea of what's in it.
Commissioner, you referred several times during these remarks to the 2009 study and pointed out differences between this and that. If there are all these differences now versus 2009, what does that say about the quality of the work of the 2009 study?
A lot has happened since 2009. This is a relatively new phenomena, even nationally. I mean, high-volume hydraulic fracturing is relatively new. Obviously, it hasn't happened in New York yet. So I don't think there's any question that parts of the 2009 SGIS weren't deeply enough done. They were shallow in places, particularly on the socioeconomic side. New York has had a long history with drilling, and we have a lot of expertise, but this is a relatively new method of accessing these deep shales. So we've lived and learned. We've got a lot of information from other states, obviously, and are going to benefit from their experience.
The people who live in those areas, though, might still be somewhat concerned if DEC itself is admitting that its own study from 2 years ago wasn't really great, then maybe they're not going to be so confident about this one either.
I expect that our hope, obviously, is that people will see that we have erred on the side of caution. We've increased buffer areas. We have lots of increase in specifications. And I think, frankly, government and industry are both learning very quickly about how this should be done right. I mean, Pennsylvania has drilled thousands of wells. They've had a handful of bad experiences in Pennsylvania, and I think we've been able to isolate what the problems were and how we can correct them. So we're feeling very confident that we have the right controls built into this version of the plan, and we'll obviously benefit from 4 more months of comments on it and make any revisions necessary.
Commissioner, local communities will have to invite these wells in their backyard. That review on what they think about this will come down in August. How does the DEC allow hydrofracking without factoring in that review right now?
I'm sorry, the first part of your question I didn't hear.
Local communities will have to invite these wells into their backyards. They're going to have to deal with it. So how does the DEC say we'll allow hydrofracking before that review is even due?
We don't intend to allow hydrofracking before that review. The panel is going to help us look at those local impacts to communities and how we can prepare for that. So I'm not sure I understand your question.
Misunderstanding, because basically aren't we saying that we're going to allow hydrofracking with restrictions as it stands right now?
No, we're not. We haven't completed the process. So we are not entertaining applications for hydrofracking. We won't until we finalize this process that I just described. So we're not issuing any new permits, not issuing any permits for high-volume hydrofracking until this process is complete, including the study that is underway right now by E&E.
So when you say permitted on private lands, that's as we know right now, but there's still a lot of other reviews with communities and other aspects that come through.
Well, permitted on private lands, that's down the road when we finish this process. This is still a draft document. It won't be finalized until we get the comment period over, which will probably be August or September and August. So we're not looking at a final SGEIS probably until late in the fall or early winter.
Okay, so that'll all be factored in then?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Could you say a little bit more about which parts of the 09 study you think were flawed?
Flawed, I wouldn't say flawed is the right, the way I would characterize it. I would say, again, we have lots more information now. I'd say in my opinion, places like where we're proposing to ban drilling is just an extra precaution. They didn't recommend that in the 2009 draft. They would have allowed drilling on state land. They would have allowed drilling closer to private water wells in primary aquifers. We just feel that there is a good reason for an excess of caution and to build in very more stringent requirements than in the 2009 plan. So I wouldn't call it flawed. I would just think that we think that these controls are more appropriate, they're better, and they'll safeguard the environment.
Commissioner, environmental groups and the gas industry have said they're concerned that the layoffs at the DEC have made it difficult for the agency to grant permits once fracking is up and running, and also provide adequate oversight. Do you guys have the staffing levels to do that?
We have limited staff right now. I've said in the past that we will only review those applications that we have the staff capacity to handle. Right now, we have limited staff capacity in the Minerals Division and in other divisions that would be required to participate, like the Division of Water. So part of the panel's responsibilities will be to look at the capacity of the state agencies, DEC and others, to properly implement this program. So they will make recommendations on how much additional staff. I think in the past, additional staff was recommended in the state budget. It was not ultimately approved, but it was probably premature because we still had a lot of work to do to try to figure out what the regulatory process would look like.
So could that create a backlog of permits? Could that create a problem down the road?
If we don't get additional resources, I would say yes, it could create a backlog in permits.
Will the permit